Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So today we're going to continue looking at quadratic functions, but specifically we're going to look at 2.9 operations with complex numbers. So we're going to do the following with complex numbers: add, subtract, multiply, and we're not going to do division. That's more honors algebra 2 than it is just traditional algebra 2. So for our warm-up, I want you to take a moment to pause the video and work on these two problems. So the first one: how do you add? Yes, I know that there's a typo there. It's been 6 years and I still keep forgetting to fix it. How do you add the terms 6x plus 3 and 4x plus 8? Well, when you're dealing with variables like this, you combine your like terms. So we have a 6x and a 4x that we can combine together to get 10x. Then we have a 3 and an 8 that we can combine together to give us 11. So 10x plus 11 would be our addition of 6x plus 3 and 4x plus 8. Using that similar concept with the next one, how do you think we will add 6 plus 3i and 4 plus 2i? Now, we have some background knowledge of our I variable, or of our I number, I should say, from the last lesson where it's the square root of -1, but we're going to treat it just like we would a variable in that first problem we did. So our like terms, we have a 6 plus 4, which is 10. A 3i plus 2i is 5i. And that would be our answer. So adding and subtracting, we're going to do the same thing we would with variables with combining our like terms, except that I technically means the square root of -1, but when it comes to combining and adding and subtracting, we're going to treat it like we would a variable like x. So if we take a look at example 3, add or subtract, we have 4 plus -6. 4 plus -6 is -2. Then we have a positive 2i plus a -7i, which is -5i. When you're doing this, you just want to make sure that you're being really cautious of your signs. Looking at the next one, we have 5 minus -2. So I'm going to write this one out. It's 5 minus a -2. There's that double negative there, so that's why you have to be really careful with your signs. 5 minus a -2 is like 5 plus 2, which is 7. Then we have -2i minus -3i. Again, we end up with a double negative here. -2i minus -3i is like adding the 3i, which gives us a 1i, or just i. So our final answer then would be 7 plus i. You don't have to write it out like I did with those two lines in blue and purple. You could just jump straight to the answer of 7 plus i, but for some of you it might be helpful to visually see that written down, just so you're being knowledgeable about that double negative when it happens. Now let's talk about multiplying. Multiplying is very similar to like we would with our variables, except that when we have an I squared, we need to keep in mind that that's really -1. The reason why it's -1 is because normally I is the square root of -1. And when I square I would also be squaring the square root of -1. Inverse operations, this simplifies down to just being -1. So I squared just equals -1. So that's going to be the important one to keep in mind. So just like we would with our variables, we're going to go through a distribution process. So I'm going to take my first number times my first number in the second quantity, 1 times 3, which is 3. Then I'm going to take 1 times -4i, which is -4i. Then I'm going to take -4i from the first quantity times 3 in the second to give me -12i. Then -4i times -4i. Well, -4 times -4 is a positive 16. I times I would be I squared. Doing a little bit of simplifying here, I have 3 combining the -4 and -12 to give me -16i. Then I have to remember that I squared is the same thing as -1. So I really have not 16i squared, but 16 times negative 1. That means I have 3 minus 16i minus 16. Now I have two more terms that can combine, 3 and negative 16, to give me negative 13 minus 16i. And that would be then our final answer for that one. Keep in mind with complex numbers, we always want to write the I term second and the real number first. So take a moment to pause the video and work on the second problem here. All right, so you should have paused that video. Looking at the next problem, we'll have 3 times 4, which is 12, 3 times negative 6, which is negative 18i, 2i times 4, which is 8i, and 2i times negative 6i. 2 times negative 6, multiplying those coefficients, is negative 12, and I times I is I squared. Combining some like terms here, I would get 12 minus 10i minus 12, which is then going to really be multiplied by a negative 1, because I squared, what I'm doing is I'm substituting that in. I squared is really negative 1. So I'm not doing negative 12 times I squared, I'm really doing negative 12 times negative 1. So what that's going to do for me is it's going to give me the 12 minus 10i plus 12. Combining a positive 12 plus 12 gives me 24 and minus 10i. All right, so we did some addition, we did some subtraction, and we did some multiplication. So that's going to conclude the 2.9 lesson. Keep in mind, I squared is equal to negative 1.